You know, we often hear that success is just about raw talent, maybe endless hard work, that whole pull yourself up by your bootstraps idea. But what if it's more tied to things like timing, where you are, maybe opportunities you don't even see? Today, we're doing a deep dive into Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers. Specifically, Chapter 6. It's this incredible story about Eastern European Jewish immigrants and their kind of surprising rise in the New York garment industry back in the day.
Exactly. And our mission here is really to unpack that, to see how their success wasn't maybe just individual grit, but how it was deeply shaped by things they inherited, this cultural and social capital. We want to look at the mechanisms behind why they became these outliers.
Right, challenging those easy assumptions about success.
Definitely.
Okay, so let's get into this idea of capital, because it's not just about money, is it? You hear terms like cultural capital, social capital.
Right, exactly. Sociologists use these terms a lot. So, cultural capital, you think of it as all the non-money assets you have. It could be knowledge, specific skills you've learned, even how you talk or act.
Okay.
For these immigrants, a key thing was embodied cultural capital. Like, skills literally embodied in them, the tailoring skills passed down for generations, almost a craft tradition.
Yeah, okay. Like knowing how to do something valuable.
Precisely. And then there's also institutionalized cultural capital. That's more about formal recognition, like degrees today, maybe. Or in their story, it became about the power they gained through, say, unions later on.
Got it. So cultural capital is what you kind of have or learn. What about who you know? Is that the social capital piece?
You got it. Social capital is all about the value locked up in your networks, your connections. I'm going to break that down a bit, too. There's bonding social capital. Think strong ties, like within your family or a really close-knit community, people like you.
Okay. Tight groups.
Yeah. And then there's bridging social capital. These might be like weaker connections, but they link you to different groups, different circles.
Well,
super important.
Both sound pretty crucial. Okay, let's connect this to the garment workers. This is where Gladwell really digs in. So picture these Jewish immigrants arriving in New York, facing, immense challenges.
Absolutely. Huge challenges.
But they brought something almost invisible. A huge number of them were already skilled tailors, which wasn't just a job, right? It was that embodied cultural capital you mentioned, this deep inherited skill.
And it was exactly what New York's growing, ready-to-wear clothing industry desperately needed right then. A perfect, if challenging, match.
Wow. Talk about timing.
And those dense community networks, that was their bonding social capital in action. Families, neighbors, helping each other out, sharing info, maybe lending small amounts of money to get started. Vital support.
Okay, so the skills and the close community help them get a foothold.
Definitely. But then it gets really interesting. Think about the uprising of 20,000 in 1909.
Ah, yes, the big strike.
Huge strike, yeah. Led mostly by young immigrant women. And they drew on this kind of collective know-how, maybe a history of organizing back in Europe, like a collective embodied capital.
Okay.
But crucially, they also managed to build bridging social capital. They connected with wealthier suffragists outside their immediate community, the famous Mink Brigade.
Right. That alliance was key, wasn't it?
Absolutely key. Because that collaboration, that bridging, helped create real institutionalized power. Unions got stronger, new labor laws were passed. It created lasting change, not just for them.
That's fascinating how those different types of capital work together. But okay, let me push back a bit, like some critics of Gladwell do. What about all the other immigrants, maybe with similar skills or backgrounds, who didn't achieve that kind of success? The survivorship bias idea.
That's a really important point, and it brings up a useful distinction. The difference between absolute success and relative success.
Explain that.
Well, absolute success is like becoming a global superstar. Off-the-charts achievement. And honestly, that often involves a huge amount of luck, timing, being in the right place. What some people bluntly call the ovarian lottery. The luck of your birth.
Okay, things largely outside your control.
Right. But relative success.
Yeah.
That's about achievement compared to, say, your peer group.
Okay.
Your starting point. And that's where hard work, choices, leveraging those capitals we talked about, that's where it really makes a decisive difference.
Ah, I see.
The Jewish immigrants in this story, they achieved incredible relative success. They dramatically improved their lives and their community standing compared to where they started, and often compared to other groups at the time.
That distinction makes a lot of sense. Absolute versus relative. And you can see echoes today, can't you? Like figuring out the unspoken rules of a company culture. That feels like a kind of embodied cultural capital.
Totally. It's learned behavior, navigating that environment. Or think about how different family values, maybe a strong sense of collectivism, might shape how kids approach school or work. That's cultural capital, too.
Yeah, influencing motivation and goals within their peer group.
Exactly. It's all around us, these invisible forces.
So pulling it all together, it sounds like success isn't just luck or just hard work. It's this complex interplay. I like thinking of it like a graph. Maybe luck, circumstances, that's your starting point, your intercept on the graph of life. But your effort, your choices, how you use what you have, that determines the slope of your line, where you go from that starting point.
That's a great way to put it. The starting point matters immensely, but so does the trajectory. And maybe a final thought for everyone listening, just consider for a moment, what invisible inherited assets might be operating in your own life or in your community? Things like cultural values, family networks you take for granted, maybe specialized knowledge passed down. How might those be shaping opportunities or maybe barriers for different people? It reminds me of that Mitch Albom quote, something like, "Children understand. Their stories sit atop the stories of their mothers and fathers, stones upon stones beneath the waters of their lives. It's all connected."
Welcome to our deep dive. Today we're looking at an unseen variable, something that really shapes success or failure, especially when the stakes are high.
That's right.
We're actually going to start with a pretty sobering event. The 1997 crash of Korean Air Flight 801 in Guam. A terrible tragedy. 229 people died.
Awful.
And investigations, well, they pointed to the captain's fatigue, some procedural errors, sure. But the NTSB, the National Transportation Safety Board, they highlighted something else. A critical human factors failure.
What was that?
The first officer and the flight engineer, they didn't effectively monitor or cost-check what the captain was doing. And the big question, the one we're digging into, is why? Why didn't they act?
Exactly. That why, well, that's the question. A purely technical breakdown just can't answer, can it?
Yeah.
So this deep dive, we're going to introduce you to something called the Power Distance Index, or PDI. Think of it as a lens.
Okay.
And it's a lens that helps transform that tragedy. It shifts it from seeming like just, a series of random, inexplicable human errors into something more predictable. A pattern, actually, driven by culture. You'll start to see how cultural heritage, this unseen thing, influences everything from keeping planes in the sky safely to, say, healthcare outcomes.
Wow. Okay. So PDI, Power Distance Index. Tell us more about that framework. How does it actually work?
Well, it comes from Geert Hofstede's work, his cultural dimensions theory. Huge amount of research behind it.
Right. Hofstede.
And PDI basically measures the degree to which people in a society, the members of a group, sort of accept that power isn't distributed equally.
So how comfortable people are with hierarchy,
Right.
with inequality.
Precisely. How much they accept and expect power differences, deference to superiors, that kind of thing.
Okay, so how does that play out in different cultures? Are there big contrasts?
Oh, absolutely. It's fascinating. So you take high PDI cultures, maybe places like Russia or China, where historically power has often been quite centralized.
Yeah.
There, you tend to find a greater acceptance of these large power gaps. Subordinates are generally less likely to question the boss. Communication flows more top-down.
Makes sense.
Then you look at low PDI societies. Think Austria, maybe the Scandinavian countries, places known more for social equality, consensus politics.
Yeah, flatter structures.
Exactly. They prioritize equality more. Decision-making tends to be more democratic. Communication is more open, two-way. People expect to be consulted.
Okay, so if PDI shapes how we talk to each other, especially across ranks, let's bring it back to Flight 801. How did this unseen factor contribute to the crash?
Well, you had the captain mistakenly thinking the instrument landing system was working, even though he'd been told it wasn't.
Right. A critical error.
A critical error.
Yeah.
And the others in the cockpit, the first officer, the flight engineer, they had visual cues suggesting they were too low. They even said things like voicing concerns about a potential missed approach just moments before impact.
But they didn't directly challenge him.
No, not directly. And this is a classic example of what's called mitigated speech.
Mitigated speech, like softening your language.
Exactly. It's when you water down what you want to say out of politeness, or crucially here, deference to authority. So instead of a clear, direct warning like, "Captain, pull up, we're too low."
Yeah.
It comes out as something much softer, maybe like, "Captain, are we quite sure about this altitude?" You see the difference?
Huge difference. especially in that context.
Massive. And look, this wasn't just a one-off. Remember the Avianca Flight 052 crash back in 1990?
Vaguely, yes. Ran out of fuel near New York.
That's the one. The Colombian co-pilot used similarly mitigated language. He was trying to communicate a critical low-fuel emergency to air traffic control, but the urgency just didn't cut through.
Wow.
So both cases, Korean Air and Avianca, they really highlight how a high PDI cultural background can create this environment where a predictable communication failure
And so deadly.
turns deadly. It wasn't necessarily about the individuals being incompetent. It was more this systemic cultural dynamic. It allowed bad decisions to go unchallenged. And think about it outside aviation. Maybe a junior nurse hesitating to question a senior doctor's medication order.
Yeah, same dynamic. That's a really chilling thought, isn't it? Just sort of politeness becoming potentially fatal.
It really is.
So what does all this mean for you listening? We've seen how Hofstede's Power Distance Index, this PDI, can shine a light on these critical communication breakdowns, not just in planes, but anywhere there's an authority gradient.
But here's the hopeful part. What's truly fascinating, I think, is the path to actually changing this. And Korean Air's story after the crash is powerful proof.
They turn things around.
Remarkably so. They went through a fundamental cultural shift, one big step. They switched to using English in the cockpit.
English. Why English?
Well, for many non-native speakers, English can feel a bit more neutral, maybe less burdened by the ingrained hierarchical cues of their native language. And crucially, they implemented Crew Resource Management, CRM. This is huge.
CRM. What does that involve?
It's basically a whole system of training. All crew members, regardless of rank, are trained to actively communicate, to challenge decisions respectfully but clearly, and to support each other. The whole point is to flatten the authority gradient.
Flatten the gradient. I like that.
Like create an open cockpit culture. It shifted the focus from just individual skill or assertiveness to managing errors as a team. It really proves that these cultural issues, they can be tackled through deliberate institutional change.
That's incredibly powerful. So this deep dive really offers some solid takeaways, things you can apply in your own high-stakes environments, whatever they might be.
Definitely.
Maybe think about these core ideas. First, flatten that authority gradient. Actively empower everyone, junior members included, to speak up. Make it safe.
Essential.
Second, practice proactive communication. Use those techniques like cross-checking information, reading back instructions, verbalizing what you're seeing clearly. Don't assume understanding.
Confirm everything.
Third, adopt an error management mindset. Just assume mistakes will happen. It's human. So design your systems, your teamwork to catch them early and mitigate the impact.
Build in safety nets.
And finally, number 4, embrace cultural self-awareness. Just take a moment to reflect. How might your own cultural background be shaping how you communicate or how your team interacts?
Yeah, that self-reflection is key because it leads to maybe the most important question to ask yourself.
Which is?
Where in your own life, maybe in your organization, your team, your family even, where might an unseen power distance be subtly influencing things, affecting outcomes? And maybe more importantly, what are you going to do about it? Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine if your modern success wasn't just about your individual smarts or talent,
Yeah.
but tied somehow to how your ancestors farmed maybe 1,000 years ago.
Yeah, it's this really fascinating premise we're diving into today from Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers, specifically his chapter, The Rice Paddy in the School Year.
Right. And Gladwell's central idea here, it's pretty compelling, isn't it?
It is. His thesis is basically that extraordinary achievement isn't purely personal. It's not just you. It's this complex mix, opportunity, cultural heritage, circumstance.
So our mission really is to explore how these deep-seated agricultural traditions, these old ways of farming, how they might forge a whole societal relationship with work.
And how that could directly translate into, say, modern-day academic success, and also, crucially, how that idea stands up to scrutiny. Does it really hold water?
This is where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
Gladwell's argument about the origins of Asian diligence.
Mm-hmm.
It's rooted in something maybe surprising, the demands of wet rice cultivation. He even uses that potent Chinese proverb, no one who can rise before dawn 360 days a year fails to make his family rich.
And if you connect that to the bigger picture,
Yeah.
wet rice farming, it's nothing like Western dryland farming. It's this intricate year-round thing. You've got painstaking construction of paddies, complex irrigation.
Right, not just sowing and reaping.
Not at all. Meticulously transplanting tiny seedlings like 6 inches apart, manual weeding, sometimes even brushing individual rice shoots, believe it or not, with a bamboo comb.
Wow. So the labor involved.
Huge. Pre-modern paddy farming needed about 3,000 hours per year for a southern Chinese peasant. Compare that to maybe 1,200 for an 18th century European peasant doing dryland crops. It's more than double.
And Gladwell argues this work was meaningful, complex, autonomous, and exacting.
Exactly, because there was this clear, direct, sort of linear relationship between effort and reward. More work, better harvest. Simple, but powerful.
So this intense, continuous effort, it must have shaped the whole society, right? How does that become a cultural blueprint?
Precisely. This huge historical demand, it fostered a culture of deep interdependence. Cooperation was essential. When everyone's livelihood depends on that collective effort, you naturally get what Gladwell calls tight norms.
Ah.
These shared values, this collective way of working, he argues they're directly transferable to a modern classroom or even, an office environment.
So this farming legacy wasn't just happening on its own. It was reinforced by other things.
Oh, definitely. It didn't exist in a vacuum. You had Confucianism, which is huge. It emphasized things like meritocracy. Think of the imperial examination system, self-cultivation, and filial piety.
Filial piety.
That deep respect for family and elders.
Exactly. Success wasn't just personal. It was a way to honor your family. That creates this powerful cultural push towards achievement, especially academic achievement.
And Gladwell points out other advantages too, right? Not just philosophy.
Yeah, he talks about a kind of dual advantage, linguistic and systemic.
Linguistic, how so? Well, think about East Asian languages, like Chinese. They handle numbers very logically. 11 is 10, 1. 24 is 2 tens 4. It's patterned, predictable. And that structure, he argues, can give kids a real head start in math, maybe even a full year ahead by age 5.
A whole year just from the language structure. That's significant.
It could be. Plus, you look at many East Asian education systems, they often have this demanding approach, longer hours, shorter summer breaks.
It's kind of like the KIKP charter schools he mentions in the West.
Similar philosophy, yeah. More time on task, reinforcing that work ethic.
Okay, so Gladwell paints this very coherent picture. Farming, culture, language, school systems, all linking up.
It's a compelling narrative, but like any big theory, it's faced some serious questions.
Right, this is where we need to be critical. What are the main pushbacks?
Well, critics argue he might be confusing correlation with causation. Just because two things happen together doesn't mean one caused the other.
And maybe cherry-picking data, focusing on evidence that fits the theory.
That's another criticism. And some worry it risks reinforcing cultural stereotypes, even unintentionally.
Are there alternative explanations for high academic achievement in some groups?
Yes, definitely. There's relative functionalism. The idea that if other paths to success, maybe business or politics, are blocked or limited for a group, then education becomes the main strategic route for upward mobility. It's a rational choice.
Makes sense. What else?
There's also immigrant selection bias, the argument that immigrants, particularly in certain waves, weren't necessarily representative of their home country. Many might have been highly educated or highly motivated already before they arrived.
So their success might be more about who emigrated rather than the deep cultural legacy itself.
Possibly. And some scholars argue that Confucianism just on its own is a powerful enough factor. You don't necessarily need the rice paddy explanation to account for the emphasis on education and hard work.
Okay, so the link isn't as straightforward as Gladwell maybe presents it. It's complex, lots of factors. But even with these critiques, the idea of culture-shaping work ethic is powerful. Where does that leave individual drive? Pure persistence.
That's a great point.
Think about Thomas Edison, right? 10,000 ways that won't work. Or J.K. Rowling, Colonel Sanders. Loads of rejections. George Washington Carver and the Peanut. That's sheer tenacity.
Absolutely. And Gladwell's analysis, even with the focus on culture and circumstance, doesn't completely negate individual effort. I think the real insight maybe is that the culture instilled a belief in the dignity and value of hard work. even tedious, difficult work.
So it's not just about inheriting a situation, but inheriting a mindset.
Exactly. The capacity for that kind of persistence isn't purely innate, it's cultivated. It's shaped by that legacy, the opportunities, the values passed down. The most profound legacies might not just be wealth or status, but these behavioral patterns, these cultural values about effort.
That makes a lot of sense. It's the software, not just the hardware, that gets passed down. So, a final provocative thought for you, our listeners, building on this idea of cultivated diligence.
Yeah, try this. Think about a task you've been procrastinating on, something you keep putting off. What if you decided to approach it with that sort of wet rice farmer's diligence, not just brute force, but focused, meticulous, persistent effort for a set time, no distractions? Or find a small, repetitive task at home, at work, and just try to do it with complete focus and efficiency. Or even simpler, start tracking your progress daily or weekly on a long-term goal. Build that habit of consistent work.
See what happens when you apply that kind of cultivated focus.
What might you achieve? And maybe more interestingly, what might it reveal about your own cultivated capacity for work? What stands out to you?
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're really digging into a classic success story. You might know it from Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers. It's the story of Joe Flom. But we want to go a bit deeper than just, retelling the tale. What we're trying to get at here is how huge success, like Flom achieved, often comes from this mix of, unique chances, cultural factors, even specific moments in history. It's not always just about raw talent.
That's right. And what's so interesting about Flom, I think, is how things that look like major disadvantages actually turned out to be the key to his success. I mean, picture it. This is the 1940s, 50s. He's the son of poor Jewish immigrants, grew up speaking Yiddish from Eastern Europe. Brilliant guy, Harvard Law Review, top of his class. But the big elite Wall Street law firms, the white shoe firms, they wouldn't touch him. They literally rejected him.
Even with those credentials.
What? Well, they were pretty open about it back then. They were looking for a certain type, the typically Nordic profile, someone with the right social background, the right family connections. They saw being a lawyer as this kind of noblesse oblige.
Noblesse oblige.
Yeah.
Like a duty of the privileged.
Exactly. And that meant avoiding messy stuff, things they thought were unseemly. So Flom, despite being brilliant, just didn't fit. He was an outsider, culturally speaking.
Wow. It's kind of ironic then, isn't it? The doors they closed actually pushed him towards something else entirely.
Yeah.
So, strategically speaking, what can our listeners take from how he handled that? How did he turn that rejection into, mastering a niche and getting that first mover advantage? And maybe we can touch on this idea of meaningful work, too.
Absolutely. So because those fancy firms didn't want him, and they definitely didn't want certain kinds of legal work, Flom ended up taking it on. We're talking about hostile takeovers, proxy fights, stuff the established firms saw as, dirty work. Undignified, it didn't fit their image.
Okay. So not the prestigious, respectable stuff.
Not at all. But Flom saw an opening. A niche that nobody else really wanted to specialize in. So he jumped in. He dedicated himself to learning the ins and outs of these really complex, frankly, unglamorous corporate battles.
Right. So by tackling that unglamorous work, that's how he built his expertise, his niche mastery.
Precisely. He wasn't sitting around waiting for some perfect, meaningful job to land in his lap. He was creating meaning through sheer competence, through mastery of something difficult. And he did this for 2 decades. He and his small firm just kept honing their skills in takeovers while everyone else was doing the more traditional corporate law.
2 decades. That's commitment.
It really is. Just staying the course, as they say. And the payoff was huge. Because when the market flipped in the late 70s and especially the 80s, suddenly hostile takeovers exploded. The M&A market grew, I think Gladwell says, something like 2,000%.
2,000%. Wow.
Yeah. And guess who was the expert? Guess who had spent 20 years preparing for that exact moment?
Flom. He wasn't just ready. He was probably the only one truly ready at that scale.
Exactly. The market finally caught up to his supposedly ugly niche.
Okay, so pulling this together for everyone listening, Joe Flom's journey isn't just like an interesting story. It feels like a real strategic lesson. It shows you the power of maybe embracing the work others avoid, that unglamorous stuff, practicing a kind of contrarian careerism, seeking out those neglected corners, and maybe understanding that mastery, getting really good at something. That's often what creates the feeling of meaning rather than the other way around.
Right. And while, circumstances and timing were clearly huge factors for Flom, you can't discount that his story also shows incredible individual drive.
Yeah.
foresight, that dedication to stick with something unpopular for 20 years, it really makes you think, doesn't it? So maybe the question for you listening now is, what's the unglamorous task, maybe in your job, maybe just in your life, that you could really lean into and master? Could that become a source of future opportunity? Or, is there an unpopular, underserved area in your field, your community, where you could add real value, maybe even create something totally new? It's definitely something worth considering.
Welcome to our deep dive. Today we're really digging into something pretty fundamental. This whole idea of the self-made person, that classic story.
Right, the rugged individual pulling themselves up by their bootstraps.
Exactly. And we're using Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers as our guide because he flips that narrative completely. He argues success isn't just about talent, it's a, quote, collective phenomenon.
It's a big claim. He essentially says, look, huge success isn't random. It's actually predictable if you understand the mix of factors involved.
Okay, so what are those factors then? How does he break it down?
He boils it down to three main pillars, things that have to kind of converge.
Yeah.
Legacy, opportunity, and meaningful work.
Legacy, opportunity, meaningful work.
Okay.
And he starts with a really surprising example, doesn't he? Canadian hockey.
Yeah, the hockey example is brilliant. You'd think it's pure talent, right? But he points out this age cutoff date for the leagues.
The January 1st cutoff.
Exactly. So kids born early in the year are just slightly older, maybe a bigger, more coordinated when selections happen.
And they get picked for better teams, get more coaching, more ice time.
Right. And that advantage just compounds year after year. It looks like raw talent, but it started with, well, a lucky birthday.
So that kind of perfectly sets up his first pillar then, legacy.
Spot on. That's the unseen scaffolding of legacy. And legacy here isn't just money. It's the cultural stuff, the values, the skills, the history passed down. It's like this invisible framework supporting you or sometimes hindering you.
Right, like the story he tells about the Jewish immigrant lawyers in New York City.
Mm-hmm. They were shut out of the big established law firms, the white shoe firms.
They were forced into the work nobody else wanted, like hostile corporate takeovers back then.
Yeah.
Seemed like a disadvantage.
Totally. But then, boom, the 80s hit, takeovers became this massive high-stakes field.
And suddenly, their legacy of being outsiders gave them this unique, incredibly valuable expertise.
Exactly. But what's really interesting is that these legacies aren't totally fixed. You can manage them. Think about Korean Air.
Oh yeah, the plane crashes.
Right. Gladwell connects it to their culture's high power distance, basically. Junior crew members felt unable to challenge the captain directly, even if something was wrong.
Which is a cultural legacy impacting safety. So how do they manage it?
They actually changed the language used in the cockpit to English. It helped flatten that hierarchy, improved communication, and, well, reduced crashes. It shows you can consciously shift these things.
Wow. Okay, so legacy provides the background, the sort of inherited toolkit. But you need the right moment, the right circumstances. That must be the second pillar, opportunity.
Precisely. The serendipity of opportunity. This is all about timing, luck, being in the right place at the right time. Gladwell talks about the Matthew effect.
Which is basically the rich get richer. Early advantages snowball.
Exactly. And Bill Gates is like the perfect example. Born 1955, just the right age for the dawn of personal computing.
But it wasn't just his birth year, right? It was specific opportunities.
Crucially, yes.
Yeah.
His high school, Lakeside, got a computer terminal in 1968, like incredibly early access.
So he could rack up thousands of programming hours way before almost anyone else his age.
Thousands. Which ties into that famous 10,000-hour rule Gladwell talks about.
Yeah, the idea you need 10,000 hours of practice to achieve mastery. But it's not just the hours, is it?
No, that's the key takeaway. The rule only works if you have the opportunity to put in those hours. Gates had the opportunity, the fertile ground, for that practice. You need both.
Okay, so you've got legacy shaping you, opportunity giving you the opening. What's the third pillar?
The dignity of meaningful work. This is about the nature of the work itself. Gladwell says truly satisfying work needs three things: autonomy, complexity, and a clear link between effort and reward.
Autonomy, complexity, effort, reward, connection. Makes sense. But then there's this sort of paradox you mentioned, using the Henrietta Lacks story.
Ah, yes, Henrietta Lacks. Her cells, the HeLa cells, were taken without her knowledge or consent.
And they became foundational for, countless medical breakthroughs, vaccines, cancer research.
Absolutely indispensable. Yet she and her family received no recognition, no compensation, no dignity in that sense for decades.
So the most foundational work, the work that enables so much other meaningful work, was completely stripped of that dignity Gladwell describes.
Yeah.
It really makes you think about whose work gets valued.
It absolutely does. Now, we should probably touch on the criticisms of Gladwell. Some people call it the Gladwell problem.
Right. The idea that his stories are maybe too neat, that he simplifies things, maybe confuses correlation with causation. Pop science, some say.
Exactly. And while the stories are undeniably compelling, it's a fair point. He's a storyteller, perhaps more than a rigorous social scientist.
So how should we, take that? Does it invalidate his whole argument for you?
Not invalidate, I think, but maybe take it as a powerful framework, not a gospel truth. His great contribution, I think, is challenging that myth of the purely self-made individual.
Yeah, that myth of pure meritocracy can be really damaging, actually. It ignores all these structural factors, the legacies and opportunities we've been talking about.
And it puts all the burden on the individual. If you don't succeed, it's seen purely as your fault, ignoring the context. Gladwell helps us see the bigger picture.
The convergence, as you said earlier. Luck, culture, timing, hard work. It all has to come together. It shifts the focus a bit from just individual drive to maybe collective responsibility.
I think that's a great way to put it. Recognizing how these systems work helps us think about how we might make them fairer.
Which leads us to a kind of call to action for you listening. We suggest doing a quick LOM self-audit. Legacy, opportunity, meaningful work. Just take a moment. Think about your own background. What unearned advantages maybe came from your family, your upbringing? What lucky breaks or opportunities came your way? What kind of work have you been able to do?
It's not about feeling guilty. It's just about awareness, understanding the architecture of your own success or struggles.
Right.
And maybe that brings us to a final thought to leave you with. Once you recognize your own fortunate circumstances, maybe your own legacy and opportunities.
How can you maybe use that position to create an opportunity for someone else? Doesn't have to be huge. A referral, some advice, maybe mentorship.
Paying it forward, essentially. Using your own unfair advantage to level the playing field a little bit for someone else.
Exactly. Just something to ponder.
Yeah.
How does this architecture of success play out around you, and what role can you play within it?
That's all for this episode of the Deep Dive Cast. Thanks for joining us. We hope you gained some valuable insights. Be sure to tune in next time for another deep dive into the world's best ideas. Until then, keep learning and growing.